Welcome everybody. We've just started, thank you. And I know that one or two people may be running late this morning because there's been some awful traffic accidents. Okay, I'll just start off with the housekeeping. A fire practice is not expected. If the alarm sounds, can all present leave the building as quickly as possible by way of the nearest exit. Designated assembly point is the public square in front of CAS, beyond the fountain, away from the civic office. If there's anybody with mobility issues, please wait in the refuge area at the top of the stairs where the emergency evacuation lift is located, and use the intercom situated to the left-hand side of the lift doors to call for assistance. No roll call will be undertaken. Thank you. Make sure that your mobile phones are switched to silent mode. The meeting is audio-visually recorded and will be available to view on the Council's website and YouTube channel. Can I ask that all those present use the microphones to make sure audio is captured? Any members of the public entering the Council chamber are accepting that their images will be retained and broadcast by the Council. If there is any public in attendance, please make sure that if you're attending to record or film any of today's meeting, please ensure this does not disturb the conduct of the meeting. Okay, so we'll move on to the formal bit of the agenda. First of all, can I take any apologies for absence? I know that we've got Councillor Glenys-Smith. Are there any other formal apologies? I do know that Councillor Hempshaw is running late because of the traffic issues. We need to consider the extent to which if any, to which the public and press are to be excluded from the meeting, and there are issues on the agenda. Does anybody have any declarations of interest? Thank you. Just need to quickly agree the minutes from the meeting of the Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee held on the 29th of June and also the one on the 7th of September. Are these agreed as a true record?
Yes, Chair.
Thank you. Okay, we have a space for public statements if there is any members of the public here, and there is nobody here today. So we move on to the substantial part of the agenda, which is the Q1 Finance and Performance Improvement Report. I'll just, a very, very quick introduction from myself. This report has actually been considered and approved by the Cabinet prior to this meeting. And I'd just like to say, Councillor Cole, Cabinet Member for Finance, Trading, Services and Planning, stated that the Council continued to operate in really challenging circumstances. So we are noting that. But it's been delivered on, and we have seen improvement of many of the standard measures. So this is actually very much to the credit of the hard-working and committed workforce. So this is going to be our opportunity to comment on the information, and I'll hand over to Debbie Hogg as usual for a short introduction. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. The report before us is the first quarter of the new financial year. As you've just outlined, the financial position, we've got a £4.2 million overspend. We've got two key pressures within children's and adult services. These are, we'll be closely monitoring them as we go forward. In terms of the performance position, the majority of the performance, the service standards that we've got in front of us are green and on track, and that's a really good place to be in as much as what our roles are to balance both the financial resources available to us as well as achieving service standards. And I think we are navigating that course really well, in as much as we're performing delivering the service on the service standards that we've got, and also managing the resources really carefully. Colleagues will be aware that a lot of other authorities are in much significant worse position than we are, and the position we have in front of us, although it is a challenging financial position, we still feel we can chart the course to the year end, and we do have reserves in order to fund that should we need it. But the objective will be that we achieve a balanced position. So yeah, I think on balance, it's a good report that's in front of you, setting out the achievements of the council.
Thank you very much. The first question we've got was actually from Councillor Hempshall, but seeing as she's not here yet, I'll ask it. The Dedicated Schools Grant, could an explanation be provided on the forecast and any deficit being carried forward, particularly if the council is performing well?
Thank you. Yes, the majority of the report covers what's called general funded expenditure. By that, it means the money that we get through business rates and council tax and other government grants, which is a ring-fence source. And then separately, there is resources that we get from central government in relation to education matters, most of which come into the council and straight out to the schools. Dedicated school grant is an element that is retained by the council to support those people with special education needs. And as the reports are identifying, those the costs associated with supporting those pupils is increasing significantly. The government has relaxed regime, which, unlike the general fund, which I've just explained, which we need to have a balanced budget every year. So if there's any overspend, which I've just described, 4.2 million, we need to make sure that's balanced. But the Dedicated Schools Grant is has more flexibility. So the government has allowed us to carry forward a deficit. Now that's not funded, so the council needs to fund that through its cash flow. But more worrying is that is a increasing position, and as you can see from the report, it's significant as it goes through the medium-term financial strategy. So the worry is the regime that the government have allowed, i.e. this flexibility to carry forward a deficit. If at any point in time the government changed those regulations, we would need to fund that. We couldn't fund that. We are no different from any other authority. This is a national challenge, and it's worrying that at any point in time that those flexibilities that have been allowed could change. But we're no different from any other authority. So hopefully that gives you some explanation about, I guess, the risk that is hanging over us and the environment that we're operating in. I think Rihanna wants to come in to...
Yeah, thank you very much. So just in relation to what Debbie is saying is there is an increasing pressure as we can see. That's a national picture, and we, in the bigger scheme of things, ours is significant, but not as significant as other local authorities currently is. That's not saying that we're not doing the work. What we are seeing is we're seeing a demand for children with the EHCP going up. We're seeing it, and that's because of a complexity of need and not having the appropriate provisions within school. And then we see that those placements, those really high cost placements that provide specialist provision, those costs are going up significantly. The unit price of that is up significantly. We are doing a lot of work through our SEND strategy that has been through our Children and Young People Scrutiny group. We're doing a lot of work around keeping children in school for as long as possible with the appropriate support, providing further targeted support through alternative provision or other targeted interventions, and then making sure that we've got the right spaces for children with particular needs. So that's a big piece of work, but we are starting to slow down the numbers of children moving out of authority, and we are starting to really challenge around costs in the specialist provisions. So hopefully you will start seeing things slowing down. Whatever we do, we're not going to solve the deficit that we currently have in the next few years.
Thank you for the really good explanation. And I think at the moment, probably we can just note that it is something that's hanging over us to some extent, possibly a future real uncertainty around the budget. Is that fair to say that?
I mean, the other approach could be, I think we need to make as much representation as possible. There isn't going to be a magic wand. We've had support from government in order to to look at innovative solutions in order to reduce to provide services or innovative solutions in order to reduce the cost. Unless government finds change the regime, I don't know where everybody's going to go. So effectively, that's really as a fraternity, local government, that we do need to make representations on terms of the DSG.
Thank you very much for that. Move on to a question from Councillor Cox.
Thank you, Chair. Sickness, is there any reason why this has increased? Is COVID still causing a sickness increase?
Thanks, Steve. I was pick this one up. So just in terms of the data, Q4, the end of 22-23, our rate was 12.29 FTE sick days. And then we've seen a steady reduction into Q1, so that's come down to 11.69, and we're just currently putting the data together for Q2. I know we're talking about Q1 today, but it's looking at it like it's a similar rate. So we have seen a bit of a decline, albeit that is above the target that we've set as a council. So seeing a decline, but it's above target. In terms of COVID, that was one of the elements. That's the third largest reason for absence at the moment in the council. But interestingly, in terms of number of sick days lost, it's the 8th biggest. So there's obviously more people are getting it, but they're not off for as long as other reasons. And it's behind infection, virus and stress as well. So that's the second biggest issue and first biggest issues in the organisation. So that's where we are. And stress accounts for 32%, musculoskeletal accounts for 19%, so half of our sickness is related to those two matters, COVID third.
Which one, what's the highest then, stress? Is that the top? Sorry, Chair, what percentage of the sickness occurrences is people working from home?
Sorry. We do look at whether it's work-related stress or non-work-related stress as well, so we do have that breakdown as well.
Thank you for that. Councillor Hempshall, you've made it. Your question's next.
Thank you. In the Equality, Diversity and Inclusion Objectives, paragraph 102, the Choose Kindness movement is mentioned. The vision is for Doncaster to be a trailblazer for its culture of kindness. It would be great to see the habitual use of the logo captured on buildings across the city. Is this something we could look at funding in the future?
Thank you. Yeah, it was a great event, wasn't it, a couple of weeks ago at Cusworth with the logo, Choose Kindness logo, sort of projected onto Cusworth Hall. It was fantastic, as well as those videos that we saw. It was fantastic. I suppose the first thing to say is what we're trying to do with Choose Kindness is to kind of embed it with another activity that we've got, and colleagues in the comms team are looking at every opportunity to promote the messages of the Choose Kindness movement in other ways, and I've got a couple of examples here. So in autumn this year, we're going to be using it with our kind of campaigns around children, young people and anti-bullying, so being kind to ourselves and our colleagues. In winter, we're looking at toy appeals, looking out for your neighbours and New Year celebrations. And then in spring next year, we're linking it to the kindness to the planet around the Great British Spring Clean. And then next summer, we're going to link it to the Summer in the City programme, Pride, Armed Forces Day, etc. So we're trying to be innovative and use the campaigns that we've got and the comms activity we've got to embed it. What we haven't got is a dedicated budget for Choose Kindness, because we're really conscious that we need to use the existing resources we've got. But that said, within that, we'll look at every opportunity with the resources we have with the existing funding to think about how we promote Choose Kindness, and that could include projection onto buildings, but it just depends on the needs of each individual campaign and how we can make the best use of the resources that we've got.
Thank you for that.
Can I just ask a follow-up question? I really sort of think it's a really good thing, this Choose Kindness, but is there any chance that it might dilute our commitment actually to equality and diversity? Because if you say equality and diversity, you're being very sort of open about exactly what you're trying to do.
I don't think so. I think it's how we do it, and how we use the messaging, and how we sort of embed the movement really in everything we do. But I think it should be complementary to what we're doing around EDI, because what I think the key message behind it is whatever interaction you have in whoever it's with and in whatever context in your life, there's a choice that we all make about how we approach those interactions, and thinking about that of how can I be kind in that space at that time with that interaction. It's just trying to get that mindset, isn't it, and trying to think differently about it. It doesn't undermine other things that we're doing.
Thank you. It's just a thought, but thank you for that. I'll just ask very quickly, what impact will the current proposed pay offer have on the budget?
We built in provision into the the budget for 23-24. The pay award that's still in negotiation is estimated to cost 2.1 million than we've got available. Excuse me. And the approach that we've taken is that we've asked each directorate, excuse me, each directorate to consider how it can resource that. So in terms of the impact, it'll have different impacts. You know, somewhere we've basically brought in additional income, somewhere we've where we're looking to restructure, so we've got a lessened workforce. But overall, we're managing that within the current sort of budget configuration that we've got. So each directorate needs to resource its own additional cost of the pay award. So you've asked about the impact. It's diverse and different in different areas within the council, but we're managing it within each directorate's effectively cash limit.
You mentioned that restructuring, and you might end up in some circumstances with less staff. And also we've talked before about one of the biggest causes for people being off sick is stress. So is there a danger that in some areas it might feed into another problem?
Yeah, and I guess that's in part why, so this report, it's constantly looking at that balance between the resources we have available and the impact on our service standards, as well as a lot of other things. And we do appreciate that that is a fine balance, you know, in terms of that sort of trade-off. I wouldn't want it to be overblown. I mean, in terms of there's one section within my team, and we're talking about we've gone through a small restructure, and it's meant that we've got a redundancy. We're looking at that doesn't impact on the service offer that we have, but obviously it will impact to the public. I mean, it will impact on the fact that we are. Unless we're more tolerant about the time it's taking to do things, that's usually where the impact will come. But the actual offer, we're keeping a close eye in terms of our service standards.
Okay, thank you very much for that. I will actually now move on to the questions for Councillor Joe Blackham. Thank you very much for attending today. Cabinet Member for Highways, Infrastructure and Enforcement. And the first question we've got is from Councillor Kearsley.
Hiya, thank you. It was just about recycling and domestic waste. I can see that the recycling rate for household domestic waste has fallen from Q4 22-23 to Q1 22-24. And I was curious as how we can maybe try and incentivise people to be more environmentally conscious, to get them to recycle more, and things we can do with that regard. And I was just curious, you know, anecdotally I've heard stories of, you know, recycling being kind of not being able to be done because there've been things in there that shouldn't have been there. Like a common one that I've heard is, I didn't know it up until 6 months to a year ago that like a pizza box, even though it's made of cardboard because it's had food waste in it, it can't be recycled. If a set of recycling has some of those in, does it then condemn the entire thing, or can those items be removed and the rest be recycled? And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Unfortunately, the first question you asked for me is not in my portfolio, it's Mark Holbrook's. So recycling is not part and parcel of my portfolio, but I believe Dan...
Because I must apologise, we've got you mixed up before and asked the...
So I do think it's a really good question, because if you look at Q4, 41%, you look at where we are now, you're looking at 38% against a target of 50%. So, and the pizza issue is quite enlightening, because a lot of people don't understand that if you've got food waste in there and cardboard, it's going to contaminate. So what we do, if we find something that's contaminated, we will put on a tag on the bin, which indicates what you should do and what you shouldn't do in terms of segregation. We also need to not forget as well, there's an element of personal responsibility in this as well for people to kind of educate themselves, and I think that's generally understood. And what we did find during COVID, when we had some, it's fair to say, fluctuation on bin collections, I think we steadied the ship, but we did have some fluctuations, is if the frequency and consistency of general bin collection is a problem, that will increase contamination, because people have a tendency to think, well, if I'm not getting my general waste, if I'm not getting my green waste collected, I'm going to stick my green waste in my general, and perhaps even in my recycling. So that's given us some confidence, because the bin collections aren't an issue really anymore. We still get the odd one or two, but generally we're looking at over 99% of collections. What we also do is an annual bin calendar, which includes details about recycling and what should go in what. This year we're going to expand that, so it's going to be slightly bigger to provide more education about waste, segregation, recycling, behaviour. That goes out by post to every household. But I think any way that community leaders such as yourselves and advocates can help us in that way of educating would be gratefully received, because it is a bit of a challenge for us. Because obviously, if it's contaminated, it either needs segregating or it can't go through the recycling process, and therefore the rates are down.
Thank you. That kind of answers the next question I've got here on behalf of Councillor Smith, which is what kind of marketing information do we provide? But obviously you've already explained that the sticker goes on the bin, and that's fine, and I apologise about the misunderstanding with the portfolio.
Yes, I must admit I sometimes fail to be a community leader in my own household when I'm fishing out the pizza boxes. And I think there's sometimes people get confused, actually, because some things are labelled clearly as being recyclable. And I have to say, I'm sorry, but it's not recyclable because of, depending on what our contract is with, Suez or whatever. So, yes, there is confusion, obviously. Thank you. Question from Councillor Cox next.
Thank you. Are we seeing any improvement in fly tipping enforcement? Thank you.
We have seen some improvement in fly tipping enforcement, and we have seen some successful prosecutions. It's quite interesting, because actually we've got a live one now where we've got good photographic evidence of a vehicle and an individual that's unknown to us, and the licence plates on the vehicle that we have photographs of are cloned. So they're on a big white van, but they're actually off a Fiat 600. Virtually impossible. It's going out to public release to see if anybody can identify the individual. But they're working hard. These cameras are working. We are getting convictions. We've had 2 vehicles crushed. Still a long way to go, but it is a better scenario than it was. Difficult as that may be to believe, it is a better scenario than where we were previously, and the rate of collection is radically improved.
I think you're aware that we have a CCTV initiative within our ward that we're having to try and help residents put forward, and it is also to help with fly tipping throughout the ward, so that the cameras would be able to track if there's been an incident. The problem that we have is that we've seen, and it's been very hard to get any support from the authority. How could the group actually get some support from the authority to help provide more CCTV cameras for that incentive?
Regrettably, there is no finance available to assist anybody with anything in reality. The budget position of this council is incredibly tight. It's ridiculously tight. It's incredibly well managed. I have to admit it's incredibly well managed, but even the amount of overspend that you've been informed of is more than the 4.2 million. It's only because of underspends elsewhere in other departments that it's at that figure. We have a huge problem. And every time we have an overspend in some department, it means that underspends have to take elsewhere to compensate, or you have to have reserves to cover that amount. We're in a difficult position. I couldn't promise you any additional funding for any reason at this point in time.
I'm not asking for a promising funding, and I think every authority in England is under pressure. And yeah, I'd agree with you 100% that we've got a good team there looking after our purse, which is fantastic. And what we've seen is within particularly within our ward, that we do have areas that need some enforcement support. The problem is that it's getting the residents to capture it and getting them to report it to the police. So maybe it's something that may not cost a lot of money, but something that could go out there saying just report it to police, and you know it's just advertising, and that shows the statistics of crime within an area, which obviously puts the police where the crime is.
We are looking, and there's a modicum of change taking place currently at how we can improve the service delivery. Dan's got a little more information.
So I mean, we've had previous dialogue about the cameras, and I think we can still pick that up with Bill. The reality is quite often in terms of police activity, it's intelligence led. And the challenge there is if it's not reported or captured, then the intelligence isn't there. One of the problems sometimes as well is the counter argument is it's not reported because nothing happened. So then that's a kind of, you know, a significant problem because it doesn't get recorded, doesn't get acted, and then people don't record it because it's not got acted. Currently looking at the NRT provision for the whole of the city. The NRT provision, that's the neighbourhood response team, is 13, comprises of 13 individuals. There's some management in there. And I am, since I've inherited that service, looking at how that is structured, how that is deployed, and how that resource could be maximised. Because you could argue that that's not a great deal of resource for a city of this size with some of the challenges. The other issue is that the nature, I think, of ASB over the years has changed. We now have significant issues in some areas with organised crime, and that presents a bit of an undercurrent as to what's behind some of the ASB. So it's important if you're tackling the ASB, but also tackling some of the causes of it. So I think it's worthwhile having a discussion. I concede that, you know, on the resources issue, it's a challenge for it. Because one of the problems with cameras as well is they're okay, but you've also got to have somebody who can get to them, somebody who can access them. We have more cameras in Doncaster than most authorities, it's fair to say, and it's a useful resource. One of my observations, having now got the services, is that resource used as well as it could be? Is it a reactive resource? Is it proactive? Now, the problem is when you've got thousands of cameras, it's very difficult to be proactive because you can't track them all the time. But I am prepared to pick up a conversation separately about some of the issues of experience because I can understand the need for the need and will for a camera, but there is a resource issue.
Councillor Jones, you got a question?
Yeah, I'm interested in the fact that we talk about the activity, and I've watched a video online about this particular van. First of all, I had a problem in actually blowing it up enough to think, well, I might be able to recognise this guy. So, you know, the information's very good compared, like you say, very good compared to what it was. But I can remember from my experience taking photographs or getting photographs of people chopping trees down in plantation on Warnington Lane. And nothing happened after that. The police were informed and everything. Nothing happened. And yet, there we are, we've got the evidence. I hope to think that when we've caught these people, that something will happen. But the point is, how do the police relate to the information that we've tried to gather throughout the cameras that have been put in relation to that particular false number plate and that van? Because that would be, to me, worthwhile. But we don't know. We don't know. Have we informed the police and have they looked at the cameras and such like? I don't know. So this comes back to what Steve was saying. You know, when we've got a good idea that something's happened in an area, well, at least we'll be able to monitor the direction of vehicle and all the rest of it. And the police should have that information. So I'm just wondering what the process is for the police to actually take part in this.
We do have a very close relationship with police actually in relation to this type of issue, and in this particular instance they've been very closely involved with us.
If I could, I mean, one important thing to remember on any element of local authority enforcement is it's not just quite often the local authority. Because, for example, some of the stuff that we do needs police input directly, but it also needs police input behind the scenes. And also, we need to think about the back office capacity as well, because if we do get to prosecutions, for those of us who've led prosecutions, who've been a prosecution lead witness, who've put prosecution folders together, it's quite resource intensive. And actually, the advocacy that gets us to that final stage of the process, which is a court appearance, is as essential as the evidence that's gathered during that process. So we do need to make sure that all of the resources pull together. I think it's fair to say we've come a long way as well recently with the police. There's been a change in personnel, and I think that relationship is working well. But the other problem that I would go back to is the level of resources, and is the level of resource that we've got specifically for operatives dealing with ASB in and out side of the city centre and right across the borough, reflective, commensurate with what we experience as demand. And there are other elements of enforcement as well we need to not forget. We've got things like trading standards, we've got licensing, we've got environmental health. And again, the point I would raise there is how well are we using the skills and tools available to us? Because not everything is necessarily a formal prosecution. You've got non-court disposals, you've got FPNs, which we're good at, but there are other things that can lead to behavioural change.
Question, Steve? Yeah.
Thanks, Chair. And I think ultimately the responsibility can come down to residents and reporting it. There are a lot of crimes that happen that are reported to social media police. Social media police don't do other than somebody else reads that post. And then when we're asked from different parishes what's happened with this, well, has it been reported? No, I put it on Facebook. I'm sorry, but I mean, that has to be pushed through general public to say, look, nothing's going to happen unless you actually report it. And then what we've found in conversations that we've had with police is that when they know a crime has happened, they will go to the CCTV and have a look. But if they're not getting that report, they don't know it's there, which is what you said before. But thanks, Chair.
Thank you. Just as a follow-up question, can I sort of get a feel as how much organised crime is involved? Because I'm sort of thinking if you are organised, you will be dumping your rubbish and making sure false number plates, that sort of thing, that even if you are caught on CCTV, it's not much good, really.
That's probably more of a matter for the police to kind of explain. But what I'm conscious of is that in my experience on this side of the fence of organised crime, is that there is a core and there are circles and there are outers, and there's behaviour which I think manifests in a certain way in certain places to express some element of control on a community and influence on a community. There is also, as ever with crime, particularly organised crime, frontages of crime which can provide in some respects an opportunity for legitimacy. So, you know, I'm not wishing to marginalise any particular trades, but we know over the years that certain trades have masked what may be behind is illegal activity. I think in that instance, it's fair to say that if somebody is prepared to put false number plates on a car, it's fair to say that they've probably got some other criminal links. That's probably a reasonable assumption, I think. And are they then linked to other activity? But we do find that there are networks. But again, I think that's more of an issue for the police to talk about. I can only talk about that from my experience as a council officer.
Thank you. Councillor Hemshaw, you've got a question.
Thank you. I've got a couple of questions around street scene. I just wondered if there's concern around staff morale. There seems to be a lot of vacancies and staff turnover, especially in my locality in the north. I'm aware that we pay lower than our neighbouring authorities. But the service level agreements are not being met for parish councils and schools, and they're looking elsewhere and getting private contracts, which is obviously loss of revenue for the council. And so the second part to it is, from a locality's perspective, what are the future challenges and how can we address them? Thank you.
I think as it's a question about some of the staffing side of things, I can answer that as the relevant director. If I deal with the morale issue, it's fair to say that street scene faces significant demands. It's a frontline service. Generally, stuff that lands in your inbox is going to be kind of, place-based stuff. I think there is an issue on occasions with morale, because they are lower paid, because it's quite a demanding job. I don't think that the previous historic shift pattern is facilitating the best use of the resources, because we have a 4-on, 4-off arrangement, and that means that at weekends we have less staff available to do the schedules. So if it's a weekend schedule, it can fall behind. We are looking at that, but that is in dialogue with the trade unions at the minute, because obviously what we'd want, I think, to do as an authority is make sure that any arrangements which change that are to no detriment to the staff. I think the pay and grade issue is not just an issue in street scene. I think that's an issue right across the authority, particularly with some professions. And I think that's something that we are looking at, and we have been quite creative in some of my other services, like planning, to provide more of a progression grade so that we can retain people. But the reality is local authority people do migrate, and the reality is people do move on occasions for more money or more development opportunities. A couple of things that I wanted to point out. Since I started 3 years ago, this ruling administration, I think, has been very supportive of me in putting additional resources and assisting us with street scene, some of those frontline services. The example I give is, fly tipping, and the success on fly tipping was on the basis of additional resources, but not solely on resources. It was about some cultural elements and some technology and intelligence and how we used it. One thing that has been apparent down at the depot, particularly, is the working conditions. It's easy to be here at Civic. It's quite a nice environment. The depot isn't perhaps quite the same. It's quite different. And, these people are working long hours. These people are working in inclement weather. We've also done quite a bit of work to improve the depot and put some enhancements in there. But again, there's more to be done. We've done some work on well-being and support, because we've had staff accessing food banks at the depot. So we've done some sessions where we engage and listen, and we provide advice on financial management and well-being. And I do my best to maintain a positive dialogue with the staff and the unions. Just in terms of the issue of the pay, we do carry some vacancies. I think, if you want me to elaborate on some of the vacancies, about 20 to 25 across that service. And one of the problems that we've got is some of the roles that we struggle to recruit to are pivotal to some of the priorities. So arborists or people that might deal with trees, we struggle. So we've got 3 vacancies there. But again, key support from the ruling administration to assist us in addressing some of that. If I go back to the question about localities, it is a good question. The service has improved. I think the service is held in reasonably high regard. We can't do everything that everybody wants in the timescale that everybody wants. One of the challenges with localities is increased demand, but I haven't got an increased footprint really within street scene. And actually, one of the other challenges that we've got is we've got an increased portfolio of what I would consider to be street scene, which requires street scene's involvement. So station gateways and other ones. So the more things we do, when the waterfront is remediated, that will become and can become an issue for street scene to maintain. But I've still got the same footprint of staff, so the portfolio is increasing. So there's a real issue about managing expectations about what's real and what we can do. but also looking at the working arrangements as well to see if we can change the shift pattern. Also, I've got a real challenge with workforce profile. I've got an ageing workforce. I've got quite a bit of people, I think, who have a lot of intelligence and knowledge of the borough who are going to move on. One of the things that we've done, particularly around some of the bin collections, evidence is that we can use the technology, I think, to move away from one person having the knowledge to a system and intelligence having more knowledge so that we don't lose some of that corporate memory when somebody goes. So it is a challenge. I think it's fair to say we've maintained a positive relationship with the unions and with the wider staff. But going forward, I think it's an area that we need to just keep a close eye on.
Thank you for that.
Got a question from Councillor Cox.
Thank you. With regard to North Bridge Depot, I know from me taxi days that there was a testing centre that were in Kirkshandle or Hedensthorpe, wherever you want to draw a boundary. And I know that a lot of staff that were working in there actually liked it in there and didn't want to go into North Bridge. Is there any kind of an incentive to put some satellite ones back in again? So, I mean, you know, you've got people working within a locality that understand that locality instead of them going from one central place.
In an ideal world with sufficient resources, yes. But the reality is that decisions were taken previously, I think, to rationalise from the property stock. We still have, within the place budget, a target of 800,000 across asset rationalisation. So it's difficult for us to look at investing in more property when we're looking to rationalise, because that would be the reality. We'd be taking on additional stock. I think what's fair to say is that if we had more outlying depots, it can enhance efficiency, but we do use others. We do some parish council areas to assist us. But the biggest challenge, I think, with the depot is that the facilities down there are quite ageing and have needed some investment around roof and car park, showers, toilets. But I don't think there is capacity within my budget to look at expanding the portfolio that we've got currently for property unless the business case really stacked up. And the problem, of course, with that area is it lends itself well to a depot, but what would the alternative usages be? Whether or not longer term there is an issue about where depot provision could be, I think that's something really that we probably do need to consider. But for now, I don't think there's the financial capacity to look at decant in part or whole.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you've just said it would be nice to have these satellite places in. They obviously were once upon a time, and they were in Stainforth, they were all over the place, which seemed to work pretty well. And a lot of the places that have now gone have been sold, and there's houses sat on them. Then surely there was an element of income that came there that could have invested back within. Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, decisions that were taken previously in terms of property rationalisation, I can't comment because I wasn't part of that process. But the reality is the authority has lost considerable funding over the last 10 years. The figures that are talked about are, 10, 15 years, 100 million. So the reality is that rationalisation wouldn't have been just on the fact that, let's do this, it doesn't stack up. But what I'm saying is that I have a backdrop of a budget to save 800,000 to deal with the deficit because we don't get sufficient funding to cover our services. That's a reality. Overall, as an authority, that would be my position. Austerity has hit us, and it is reasonably hard as a sector. I do think longer term there is an option to look at the ways of working and whether or not we've got facilities that we could use which could enhance efficiency. But at this current time, it's set against the backdrop of an £800,000 target for rationalising the portfolio.
I think to add to what Dan said, Steve, we have to recognise at the time it appeared to be the appropriate thing to do, and there was good reason for doing it at the time. Given the benefit of hindsight in a different fiscal position, it would be ideal to have things back where they ought to be. We recognise that it were ideal, same as the change shift system. At the time it appeared to be the solution to the problem. We now recognise it's not, it's a disadvantage, not an advantage, and we will look to rectify that. But it's a learning curve for us all. What we think is right today maybe 110% wrong tomorrow. And that's where we are. We're still learning. We're still trying to improve, even given the difficult fiscal circumstances that we're operating under. And they're getting more difficult by the day.
Can I ask about the enforcement side of street scene? How effective do we think it is? You know, we can fine people for dropping litter, for letting their dogs mess on the pavement. Does it actually work as a preventative measure? And do we get reasonable amount of income from it?
So it does work, but it won't ever prevent fly tipping, because I don't think enforcement is solely the issue of preventing fly tipping. One of the things with fly tipping is about the provision of your alternative services as well, because the majority of people will use household waste recycling centres, won't go and dump it down a lane. I think the enforcement needs to be targeted on those that offer that. Well, I'll get rid of that waste for you, and then it goes and gets dumped. Just in terms of the amount of enforcement activities, because I'm conscious that this is also covering ASB as well as fly tipping. So in 2023, which is obviously from the 1st of April, the enforcement team has undertaken 299 actions. Now that includes warnings, legal notices and prosecutions. If needed, we could provide a little bit more breakdown about that. But what I would say is enforcement is an angle of dealing with ASB, and it's an angle of dealing with fly tipping. But in fly tipping, it's not the sole solution. It's about the provision of the service as well as the collection, and providing people with an alternative. I mean, the majority of people, I think, will do it in the right way. But going back to where we started on the registration number, that's clearly quite organised.
I was thinking more of people just dropping litter, not necessarily fly tipping, but
we have issued quite a lot of FPNs in relation to litter. Litter's a little bit like dog fouling as well, in that you've got to get them while they're doing it. That's one of the problems. So you've got to be there, and it's got to be observed. But wherever we can, we will take that action. And one of the things as well that we've also got now is more intelligence to think about where we might deploy some of the enforcement activity, and also some of the cleaning, because what we've got in relation to some of the bin technologies, and have a better understanding of when the bins are getting full, rather than going out and cleaning up on a schedule, thinking a bit, well, actually, you know, let's be a little bit more intelligence-led. But it does work, and it does deter, but I don't think enforcement is solely the issue in relation to littering, because it's behavioural. And one of the problems that we've got as well, I'll give you an example. We've got one area that's got quite an acute issue with street waste and back alley cleansing. Of the FPNs that are issued there, 80% go unpaid. So clearly FPNs aren't necessarily working.
I'll just move on to the last question in this section. We're just interested in how major projects are going. We recognise that this cuts over with the Mayor's portfolio. And also we recognise some questions later on in the agenda about there's a decrease in overall investment into Doncaster. Could just both of you comment on what challenges are with the current market and how our priorities progressing?
I mean, in the first instance, I think Debbie can contribute, because obviously Debbie's got a very clear handle, hold and grip on the overall major projects programme. From my experience, at a practical level, one of the problems is increasing costs. So we get some money at a particular time, or we get allocated some money at a particular time for a particular project, and then over time, inflation, cost of materials increases, but actually the cost envelope that we got in the first instance doesn't. We also find as well some of the timescales regarding the funding, whether or not it's levelling up, whether or not it's town deal, whether or not it's sustainable transport fund, whether or not it's gain share. I think sometimes we're a little bit unrealistic, because, for example, something like the waterfront and the remediation of a site is quite complicated, but we've got very clear timescales, and sometimes there's flexibility on those, sometimes there's not as much flexibility as we'd like. If you were to ask me how we're progressing, I think we're progressing well. I think we're at a bit of a pivotal moment where we'll start to see a little bit more activity in 2024. And that's quite often a good barometer of how well you're doing in terms of growth and attracting and securing funding and delivering. So the old red cranes argument is quite a good one. The more red cranes you see generally, the better the investment would be. But examples I would give you is it's coming together a little bit because we've now got the scaffolding for the roof around St James's. We're progressing on the waterfront remediation and we've sorted out some of the land ownership issues. We've qualified and got certainty on a second college. We're also moving forward with some of these units here being let in the very near future, and Copley House will be redeveloped and the old library will be removed. Now, you could say, well, they're very city centre centric, and I do think the wider principal towns present us with a bit of a challenge, because it's fair to say some of the funding is orientated to city centre. We've been identified as a levelling up partnership. Again, that tends to be city centre focused. We've been identified as somewhere that can get more town money, which is £2 million for 10 years, but that is looking like it's going to be principally around the city centre. One thing I would say is the authority is investing significantly in areas such as Mexborough. Mexborough's getting potentially 10 million-ish funding for transport through the Sustainable Transport Fund that came through South Yorkshire. That will include significant changes to some of the highway network there. But a bigger problem for us is delivery of some of that regeneration or investment beyond the city centre, because current policy nationally tends to be putting it into the city centres, which to some extent I can understand, because they're a reasonable barometer for how your other outlying areas are doing, and also give developers confidence in investment. I don't know if Debbie wants to talk any more about the oversight of the project, because Debbie is very close and scrutinises that and me quite regularly.
I guess just in terms of the context, we've set up a monthly major projects board in order to give more focus in relation to the major schemes that we have. So that's the Towns Funds and the Levelling Up Fund. They've got different timescales, as Dan's indicated. They are very challenging and complex propositions and large sums of money that we've received. I guess probably one of the reason why you've asked is that there is within the capital programme the slippage. That's in part because not in relation to the schemes that we've got that are governmental funded, because we've got slippage in terms of the time when expenditure is being incurred, but also we get the funding usually at a different time scale, but to offset that. So there is slippage in terms of the scheme, but the funding is there because it's been effectively grant-aided to us in terms of as a package. What we have got in terms of the capital programme per se is we have got more work to do, and that's in part why we've developed a pipeline process, so that we're scrutinising what's going into the capital programme and being more clear about the timing of it. What's traditionally happened is people and council have approved capital schemes so that they start, because it's a 5-year programme that we're talking about, so they're starting, and then at some point during that 5 year they'll come on track. What we want to get into a better place is getting approval, but sequencing it so that resource, we're more clear when that resource is required, so then there'll be less slippage being reported. So that's something we're really trying to get a grip of this year in terms of the capital programme, being clear about what people are putting into the capital programme and when they can execute it, so that then there's less slippage, and that in itself helps. The particularly where the council's funding it improves the council's cash flow as well. So because we need to borrow for those schemes. So there's more work to do on that, and as Dan said, where the funding is central government, there's always challenges where we've been given a lump of money, 20 million of the order for that levelling up, and the expectation is you're starting from day one. Well, schemes don't work. There's a lot of preparation that needs to take place in the background before you actually see something happening.
Councillor Jones, you've got a question?
Thank you, Chair. I would like an update on the proposals for Town Fund, especially when we didn't achieve what we wanted to achieve by getting the centre for East Coast Main Line at Doncaster. I think that's an important aspect to consider when you consider about prioritising of future development.
Have you got any comments on that, Councillor Blackham?
I have, because it's particularly important in one sense. Town Deal is not under the control of Doncaster Council. There is a board, a separate board, a Town Deal board, that look after the Town Deal. But the reality is, the question that you asked is most pertinent. And that's really, what are the challenges associated with major projects? We have seen significant, as much as 40% increase in prices for materials. Labour prices have gone through the roof. Debbie, Ros, Lynn Jones, myself, and the team as a whole are facing problems every day in relation to it. But by and large, major projects are on track. May not be 110%, which is what we want, because there will be compromises en route. There always has to be compromises in such a scenario because we've never experienced this difficulty, this degree of difficulty previously. But it's incredibly challenging. Major projects are on track. There is far less money available in terms of investment into this borough, as there is in nearly every borough. COVID, cost of living, price inflation has impacted investment basically everywhere, and we're no different to anybody else. But I'm confident still that we will deliver the major projects that we've put forward. It will be difficult, don't doubt it for a minute. It will be difficult, but we will achieve it.
Councillor Cox, you want to ask?
Thank you. I'd agree with what Joe just said there, and it also relates to us locally as councillors as well, because we're seeing that a lot of the 106 programmes that they have slippage, if you like, and they haven't got enough funding to follow it through because, as you said, with price increases, material increases, absolutely get that. My question was, are we still following Doncaster Master Plan? Because that surely was like, I'm going to say, off-the-shelf things that are already a wish list. So you'd like to think that they are there, they are costed, and potentially, I mean, a percentage can be added on, that we know that percentage of increase is there. So, you know, that could be rolling, but I'm not sure if it is.
The point I did ask Joe is about a report coming to this committee, not about what the people have done. I quite appreciate all that, but I think what I need as a councillor and part of the OSMC is a knowing of the direction that's happening and what's happening. I mean, we actually did the same thing. We built a college up here where the HS2 were going to be built, and it's totally empty. And it didn't cost the Doncaster a penny. But what happens to that? Then it's, you know, you think, well, what's going to happen to that? We don't know. We don't know. You may know, but I think that's an opportunity for councillors to have a whole picture of how the council works. And it's the same with that development in the station. You know, you'd like to think that we had some idea. I'll give you another example. We've sat through and listened to all the every other week about what's happening with the airport, and that's been fantastic. I tell you now, that the people who've been talking to and been involved, that's the same case with all those other stuff that goes along. We're not just the minions that actually end up saying, oh, that's what's going to happen. We ought to be part of this process as a council, as councillors, and that's why I asked the question.
Can I just say that I think we have had like seminars in the past, and I do think it's a good idea that we ought to have. It ought to come back to us at some stage in more detail about the town centre, city centre planning. Yes, it's like you say, not quite, obviously not with the frequency of the airport, but I think it would be a good idea.
I don't want to, but I think there's an incentive to actually encourage people to have a knowledge of what's happening within this community.
Yeah. Okay.
You've raised
Sorry,
the question.
Debbie, did you want to come in?
Can if you like. The point simply is you've raised a question. You want a response. That response will be provided.
Thank you.
Overview and Scrutiny Management Committee can ask for that type of response on any topic they want at any time, and you will receive it.
Sorry, Debbie, did you? And then I'll just bring Councillor Khan in.
So through the Regen and Housing Panel, we do have regular updates, and I think the last one was with Scott Cardwell earlier this year, and I think it's, if not every 6 months, at least once a year, I do get regular updates on that, and any councillor and any officer is welcome to attend. And Joe, it'd be nice to have you there as well next time, if you want. Keep Councillor Jones happy.
I'll just bring Debbie on, and then we do need to move on.
Yeah, I'm going to say we can incorporate a little bit of narrative in terms of, because the capital programme's included as part of this quarterly report, and there is some, but I get that what you're wanting is like that helicopter view. Specifically in relation to the Towns deal, it's not been impacted by not securing the HQ for Network Rail. It's because the proposition is still there. We've got the funding. That was part of the Towns deal, and the proposition around that the multi-use facility outside the train station is still progressing. So there's obviously, as we've just talked about, it takes time to ensure that we've got all the land acquisition and we've got the right traffic flow, etc. But the actual concept will take place.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next section. Got to apologise. I do remember you did ask a specific question. Sorry. Yeah. What was the?
It's just whether we're following Doncaster's master plan.
I mean, again, we can look back. When I first started some time ago, I sort of drafted myself a little note about what the master plan, how it, all the different components. And it is interesting to look back, because there's lots of those things that we set out some 7-10 years ago that are actually coming to fruition. You can probably see components of them taking place. So it would be good to look back, but certainly that those building blocks are certainly coming to fruition.
We really need to move on now, Steve. Next section, I've got a couple of questions from Councillor Hempshaw.
Thank you. The Remake Learning Days Festival was a great success, a tribute to all involved, I think. And I'm just wondering if thought's been sort of put into how the momentum is maintained and how we can keep this going in the coming months. We don't want it to be a one-off excellent event, but more like a springboard for wider learning participation. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you for the recognition, Councillor Amsall. We are very proud of the Remake Learning Festival that we had on this year in terms of a week's of activity for our children and young people. Remake Learning Day, or Remake Learning, is one of the concepts that we're going to use to accelerate our progress in engaging young people, children and families into education, further development of skills and creating that ambition. It's really about creating ambition for children and young people. So yes, we absolutely will continue with the work around Remake Learning. A few things that we are currently doing are that we're establishing a Remake Learning Council, which will have representation across the education and skills, cultural and creative and business landscape to make sure that everybody's engaged in it. Because as you can remember, the Remake Learning stuff was around bringing educators, children, young people, families and businesses together and creating that network and creating that engagement. We're investing in a learning manager, which will be principally dedicated towards the leading of the Remake Learning agenda, driving forward the delivery of the citywide learning program. We also will continue to have Remake Learning Days festivals. So throughout the year, there will be events specifically relating to Remake Learning, and then a week-long festival on an annual basis. Running termly, we will have regular pop-up activities and smaller scale activities to complement the wider festival, and we committing a proportion of the shared prosperity funding to commission further activity, including through grants and seeking other additional funding to secure some of the great events that we saw. Working with a health determinants research collaboration to develop new and different ways of evidencing impact, because it's great to have a day, but actually we need to show the impact that that's having on children and on families, and to create the evidence base to continue to learn what works in relation to that. We also continue to develop links with other services and programs to better connect the offer, for example, through our locality models and our cultural services. And the final thing to just mention is that we continue to work in close partnership with Remake Learning in Pittsburgh, where this whole idea of having a city of learning actually came from.
Thank you. I just think such an innovative idea, and to have that link with them, I think it just shows that Doncaster is doing things that a lot of other people aren't. So I think we should be proud of that. Thank you.
Do you want to carry on, Councillor Hemphill?
Okay, and the other sort of good news story really in paragraph 15 was the persistent absence in secondary schools, which has dropped. It's improving our ranking to 104 out of 151. However, there is still a big job to do. What has made the biggest difference in supporting this improvement? How do we know? What needs to be done further to accelerate any improvements, given that being in school is the biggest improver of life chances for our young people?
So again, thank you for that question. Attendance is a really important part of a young person's journey and actually setting themselves up for the rest of their lives. And things like Remake Learning and other initiatives try to engage young people in engagement and keeping them engagement. We know that we saw a big drop in terms of attendance post-COVID, and that where a lot of children are finding them are quite anxious about being in school, for example. So we're thinking about that. From an attendance and pupil welfare point of view, the biggest success for us is the connection of services, not only internally in the council, but also with schools and the wider system. Working with the inclusion team to reduce suspensions. So, suspensions, weekly suspensions, to reduce that, coupled with a rapid response to young people who are out of school for any length of time. Firstly by the schools and then followed up by us in the welfare education service. Education welfare officers are working more closely in communities, and for example, they are basing themselves in the My Place hubs so that they're closer available for families to access. There has been a firm response across the city in terms of holidays in term time, following a big media campaign, schools pushing their attendance, that attendance is important, and ultimately we have issued fixed term penalties where required and even went on to prosecutions. We know this has made an impact on this year because we've had much fewer referrals in for holidays in term time absence compared to the same time last year. In addition to this, we have also secured some additional funding from the Priority Education Investment Area, which has secured additional resources in attendance hotspots. So for example, in Stainforth, trying to be really innovative, where one school has improved their attendance by 2% per year by offering free school meals for all children. Doncaster has a pilot area for the Bernardo's mentoring project this year, which will include volunteer mentors that will be working with secondary age children referred by the school to improve attendance for persistent absenteeism. We expect that this will have a positive impact on our young people who make up the cohort of young people who are persistently absent, and ultimately improve overall attendance figures. So the lower level need that prevents children from coming into school, having a peer mentor that actually can support them. So we're very excited in piloting that.
Do you want me to move on to the nurturing a child?
Yes, thanks, Leanne,
yeah. Just on the adoption of children in care, do we feel the target was over-ambitious? Are people not coming forward, or are there delays? Just wondering if you could build on that, thanks.
I think what we need to do is in our quarterly performance, and we will do it going forward, we need to have a bigger focus on permanence, because that's what we want for our children and young people. When they come into care, we want to find them either families, foster carers, residential homes, or places where they will have some permanence. So we need to report better on that, and we'll do that, and I'll come on to that. But in terms of adoption in particular, we've seen a big impact post-COVID on adoption, and even during COVID, we couldn't get children adopted through the COVID period because of the delays in proceedings, courts, and finding adopters at that adoption matches in that difficult time. However, there has been some positive improvement in the number of children that's approved for adoption and a positive level of matching with adopters over the past 12 months, so steadily coming back. And again, this is a national thing that we are seeing. However, given the small numbers, it looks like we haven't been ambitious enough and we overstretched ourselves in terms of the target. The system is now much more recovered, and however, given the timeline that it takes for a child to be adopted, we're not seeing that in the performance yet. So that's why we've got quite low numbers. Adopted data shows improving performance in respect of inquiries received and the number of adopters in assessments. We are not yet seeing that translating into the numbers and into the actual performance. As part of our planning for permanence for all children in care, we can say that since April 23, 6 children were adopted, and in the same period, 52 children returned to live with their parents or another relative, with a further 20 children being made subject to a special guardianship order. That's all the permanent stuff. So actually, if you tally all of that up, there's nearly 80 children that actually returned back into a permanence, living with their parents or through a special guardianship order. In the future, we will capture this data to give a better picture around permanence, which is not only adoption.
Thank you.
Do you want to move on to your next question, Leanne?
Yes, thank you. So, next question is 58% of early help audits requires improvement for inadequate or are inadequate. The report says that in many cases this is due to the quality of recording onto a mosaic system, not the quality of practice. This has been an ongoing problem for some time now, and it appears to be deteriorating. I just wonder if you could, sort of tell us how that's going now. How is it looking for the future? Hopefully it's going to be improving and it's going to be more reliable information.
So the early help system is relying on partners inputting onto the new mosaic system. So it's partners and ourselves that input onto that. And we have done a lot of work with getting more lead practitioners in practice to do early help interventions, but also for them then to record onto the system. And there, as I say, there has been some issues when we transferred over to the new mosaic system and rolling training out. And that's what you see is people not being able to record appropriately on the system, and not the practice being poor, but just a lack in understanding of how the system works and how we're recording. So we've done a lot of work with partners and lead practitioners out in the community to help them, to enable them to use the system more effectively. We're hoping to see some improvements in Q2 because of the work that we've done. So hopefully you'll see an improved performance then.
Thank you. We had a scrutiny meeting actually just this week about this with head teachers, and what came out of it is, should we look at maybe making it mandatory for people to take that training as well? Because, most people are conscientious and do that, but like you say, when it's all different partners, it can become unstuck when they've not received that training.
Thanks, Leanne. I saw a question from Councillor Jones.
Yeah, on the third-party inputs to the mosaic, what checks do you do on those inputs?
So all of those practitioners will be DBS trained and checked. So there's a disclosure and barring service. So all of them will have DBS because they will be working in the children's system anyway. And then they will have to undergo some training before they are able to access the mosaic system. Does that answer your question, Councillor Jones?
Did you mean checks on the actual
Inputs.
standard of the input?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I'm aware we have a system in St Leger that provides information by third party, and it's important because it's about health and safety, and they are checked. They are checked against one person has a particular area and looks at that report, and to see whether it's up to standard. Are you with me?
Yeah.
Now, this is the point I think that Leanne's trying to make is, you know, we should have a standard that's up there.
And I think that's the audits that we do, and that's why the audits are showing that we have got 58% of the cohort of people that are inputting onto the system. The things that we've looked at is not up to standard. So that auditing tells us that further work needs to be done in that area. So that's how we check.
That suggests, Chair, that we ought to have another update on the report on that particular aspect within this committee.
So it's one of the performance indicators, Councillor Jones. So you will see in the next quarter, you'll see that performance and you'll be able to challenge me on that. But I'm hoping that you will see an improvement in quarter 2.
Councillor Cox, and then we'll move.
Thank you. I mean, same as Leanne said, I mean, the meeting that we had the other day was very good, wasn't it, with head teachers among. But what I find a bit annoying is that this issue with the computer system and with Mosaic and everything else has been going on for years and years and years and years. It's caused more problems, I think, than it's created. But can we get some assurance of when it's going to actually work properly?
Can I start, and then Debbie Bull is desperate to come in on well. So just to be very clear, the Mosaic system went live when last year, this year, February, April. So it's only went live February of this year. Bearing in mind the year before, we were putting right what wasn't done. Yeah. And so we've done a lot of work in building the system, and that's where Debbie will come in and creating the system to operate in. We are seeing great success in using the system. We have got really good practitioner engagement in there, but there will always be some quality improvements that we need to do. So in terms of it's been going on for years and years, it hasn't, and it's getting better every day. So is my starting bit, and then I'll let Debbie come in.
I think Rihanna summed it up. I think that's the part I wanted just to sort of correct. Effectively, I know that the brand Mosaic or whatever has just been, because we've had it on the governance statement and other things, so we've had it in close scrutiny in order that we've known that there needed to be improvements. But just going back, the trust had a different system. We had to migrated all the data over to Mosaic. The staff indicated that it was really complicated to use the way that it had been configured. We reconfigured the system in order to, and we're at really early stages of people getting familiar with the new system. So you might have all heard that there's problems with Mosaic or the children's system, but actually there's been different issues where we're actually getting to, we're climbing up the mountain almost, because this is about data quality, this is about how people are using the system. So it's less about the nuts and bolts of the configuration of the system, and now we're at the point where we're really getting to, you know, the richness of information through that management have now got access to, and that we're using through the performance clinic on a monthly basis. We're getting into really where possibly you would say we should have been some years ago, but it is a really good place to be in, that we've got more confidence about how the system works, and we're getting that grip around, so that we've got reports and we can pinpoint where there are issues in relation to compliance of completion and data quality about through the quality audit. So we're in a really good really granular place of being assured about the application, the utilisation and the data coming out of it. Yeah.
Okay, we'll crack on. Thank you very much for that. We'll crack on to the next section. Councillor Hemshaw again.
Sorry, it's me again. After the pandemic, we're seeing more events in Doncaster and sites opening up again. Can we build on this in places such as Cusworth Hall, which is in my ward? And we've got many more across Doncaster, sort of like little jewels that we need to, I feel, you know, use that potential, make these heritage sites thriving beacons in our communities, first of all, and then get people coming in from outside to experience these fantastic venues. I'm just wondering, it feels a little bit like it's a bit of a missed opportunity for council revenue, because there could be like little gold mines, some of these sites, and I don't feel that they're being sort of brought forward in the way that they should, and not enough going on, basically.
Thanks, Councillor Hampshire. So, and I think you've been pretty hands-on, haven't you, in supporting Cusworth Hall in your ward, as you say, with Councillor Grace. And you picked up on some things that are happening, and actually I think probably helped us make some things happening there. So I talk about Cusworth and maybe extend it to other places, but we've been working with Events Doncaster to build a kind of cultural programme. So good example recently, in terms of Doncaster Stories, really successful kind of community event that happened there, and future events, hoping to look at a last night at the proms type event, also planning the soapbox derby with the parish council locally. So that bit of a sticky wicket, that one, in terms of a rocky road to get in there, but it feels like that will now be a successful event with some decent community participation, and doing quite a lot to try and support local people to access, and local businesses to access those sorts of settings. And I think it's right that you're kind of acknowledging the potential of the venue and the opportunities to do things there. And I think it's about, I mean, there's other things we can do. So we're looking at room hire, we're looking at a weddings offer and reintroducing that, which is something that people value kind of pre-pandemic, that we need to reintroduce, things like educational visits, conferences, visitor accommodation. So I think Cusworth Hall gives us a blueprint. Now we're stepping up after the pandemic about what we can do at other sites. So giving you a bit of feedback about Cusworth today, but I think you're right to ask us about, as we develop, what we'll be doing on other sites as well.
Thank you. We had a tour of Cusworth last week, and we want it to be the set of a period drama. That's the kind of where we're aiming. But lots of places like this all over Doncaster. But thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Khan, you've got a question?
Yeah, just following on from that, we talk about, you know, Doncaster Stories, and earlier on we were talking about choose kindness and community engagement. As a workforce, though, don't we need to be fully engaged with the communities that we work with to then be able to go out and engage with the residents of Doncaster? And I'll refer colleagues to page 98 or paragraph 98 of the report, where there's mandatory training rates, and it's quite concerning that the rates for equality in the workplace is only 4 out of 10 or 42% of core staff have completed. There's data protection in children social care. Only 39% of staff there have completed that training. Within the senior managers, it's a bit higher, and it's at 71%. And hate crime training is only at 75%. So when, as a workforce, we're not fully engaged with what we're meant to be doing, and then to go out and implement what we're trying to deliver as Team Doncaster, how can we effectively do that? And it's a question to all the directors, not just at you, Phil, or anyone in particular.
I mean, I can field it if you like, and others might chip in. So it's obviously shame Lee's not able to be here for this part. I haven't picked up the kind of HR function, but I think we can provide a written response around the mandatory training rates that you've described, and how we are increasing those. And I think the start of your question almost was from a different place, which is how can Doncaster staff engage in our communities? So I think that's an equally important question. So the idea that we need to do the must-do mandatory stuff, but we also need to change and support our staff to be more present and visible and accessible in communities, so that, for example, places like Cusworth and many other places as well, we're leaning into them more. That's what we'd identify as part of that locality programme of work, and recognising that we need to move beyond the governance of locality working and getting into something where it feels like our staff are kind of thinking locally and acting personally in the way, and we're supporting them to do that.
Yeah, thank you, Phil. I mean, my point being is if we're not completing the hate crime training and then we're going into the communities, how can we properly engage with those communities we're meant to represent? It makes it a bit difficult to do so, doesn't it? And I mean, we've got some. I mean, but what frustrates me the most is we've got almost a segmented, and we're still working in silos within the local authority. So if we look at Dr. Joseph and the work he's doing through the minorities board and the work that Natasha Mercer does, it's absolutely fantastic. Really out there engaging in our communities, got a grasp of what's going on. And then we've got other directorates where the feedback and the response I'm getting is that we're failing to respond to the needs of our communities. We're making decisions which affect our communities without engaging with them. We're being led by... so Steve's egging me on, but there's no need to, Steve, honestly. It's something which we've all been bombarded with the emails, and I think people know what we're talking about here as well. But how we talk about choose kindness and all the rest of it, but isn't the definition of being kind is understanding what our residents really want and what they need, rather than us forcing decisions on them and making promises to respond and not getting responses back. And it's just really frustrating for people across Doncaster and councillors. So it's, I mean, I don't want to start highlighting individual stuff, but I think we know what we're talking about, don't we?
I mean, last week at the Ethnic Culture Fusion Network's annual general meeting, as you say, the great work of Dr. Joseph was quite rightly highlighted, but the other directors here were in attendance, and it sounds like we need to be clearer as a council from an officer perspective about what we're doing to support equality, diversity and inclusion in everything that we do. And you know, it's difficult, in a way it's difficult without getting into specifics, but I think we have many examples of very prompt, responsive support to communities from across our directorates, and we have some where we could do better. But I think what you're suggesting, and what I think is an important message, is that what we're doing around equality, diversity and inclusion needs a bit more of a spotlight, and we need to show that we are committed to it, and you need to feel like it's not the preserve of one or two officers. So we'll have to take that on the chin and think about how we can support OSMC with that in a future meeting.
Yeah, I mean, I can, Chair, if you'd allow me, I can go into specifics if you'd want me to. Phil saying he doesn't know what the specifics are, I could go in. But my point around this is that unless we engage with our communities and the promises that we make, whether that's by cabinet members or directors or even at mayoral level, if we don't come back and fulfil those promises that we've made and we don't engage, then how can we really serve the communities that we represent as elected members and you people represent in the positions that you hold?
Thank you for that. We'll move on quickly to the next section. Councillor Greenhalgh? No, I am moving on now, Steve. I really am. Sorry? Go on then, quickly.
What are we doing to engage with young people within villages and communities to highlight their local history and their place within that community?
So through our youth offer, we provide some of those activities within localities through our holiday activity programme. I don't have the specifics in front of me for your particular ward, Councillor Cox. We do through schools, we do engage young people in cultural awareness and what that looks like. So that predominantly sits within the school curriculum. I can get you the specifics if you need that.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Greenhalgh, have you got some questions?
Yes, good morning. Adult social care. What is the drive behind the increasing pressure on the services, and what are the future risks?
So, I mean, there are several reasons for pressures on adult social care services, some of which will be shared across other council services. So one obvious reason would be demography. So we often hear about ageing populations, but we've also got a sense that quite happily people with medical conditions and disabilities who maybe a few years ago would not have survived are living much longer. So we've got those demography issues to manage. We've got the cost of living crisis to deal with as a pressure on adult social care services like it is for others. So many people don't have the resources now to keep themselves safe and well, and to manage their own health conditions and disabilities in the way that they might have been able to a few years ago. So again, that creates pressure. And we've also got pressure from our NHS organisations, fairly well documented, maybe from our GPs to our mental health trust to our hospital, where we understand kind of workforce pressures and their difficulty in keeping people healthy in a preventative way, and how that can have knock-on consequences. Well, we can't control all of those factors from an adult social care perspective. We can improve our partnership with the NHS though, and that's something that's a big focus at the moment. What we can control in adult social care is our own response, and still recognising that although we've made quite a lot of improvements in this regard in terms of the way that people are accessing support, that there's still too much bureaucracy that people and our frontline staff are encountering. So I think my main job in terms of managing risks is to manage what's within our control, and get to the point where I can describe people not being handed off from one person to another, it not feeling bureaucratic, it feeling like we're alongside them. So that connects with Councillor Khan's earlier question about getting alongside communities. But there are a number of headwinds that we need to manage, and working with the NHS more closely is something else as a council that we'll need to up our game on.
Yes, thank you for that. Just wondered as also, do you work closely with more local health services like doctors' practices and things like that? What kind of involvement have you got there?
So it's a good question. The way that primary care, which is what the kind of the jargon for GP practices and services that are surrounding GP practices, it's not just GPs, but the sorts of people that you will encounter in a surgery who aren't always a GP. There are primary care networks in the 4 localities that we have, and actually in the central locality there are a couple of primary care networks, and they are kind of amalgamations of leadership that we can engage with in each geography. So for example, in the north of the borough, the primary care network there run a workshop for partners to engage with, to pick up on how we could better join up health and care in the north, and there is a plan to do that in the other localities as well. I think where we don't do as well as we probably could, and I think our GPs are incredibly hard pressed, but I think our job actually would be to get alongside individual GP practices and understand the strengths that many of our GPs have and the practitioners around them have, and get alongside them a bit more. So there can be a little bit of bureaucracy in accessing just the lived reality for GP practice and getting alongside it. There is work happening later in the year, which I forget the jargon for, I think they're calling it a perfect week, which is a kind of a health jargon for what, if everything was great, what would it look like? Where we'll be specifically partnering with a GP practice amongst other partners in the centre of the borough, and looking at the things that get in the way day to day for them and how we can help, and there will be some quid pro quo with that. But I think there's a lot of untapped potential in working better with primary care. I think they need it, and we need to think about how we can get alongside to provide it.
Yes, I quite agree. I was just wondering in that direction. Secondly, is there any news on the results of the peer review ready for the Care Quality Commission? And is there any indication of when the inspection could be held?
So for people that don't know, we invited colleagues in via the Association of Directors of Adult Social Services. So the other directors and other kind of professionals working in other parts of Yorkshire and Humber came in at our invitation to review where they thought we were at. And they were looking at Care Quality Commission assurance and that future inspection, but they were just generally looking at how they thought we were doing. That report is now published. So what we'll do with the minutes is we'll share it. So it's on the council's website. So we'll use, really helpful you ask the question, we'll attach the link to the minutes so any member of the public can look at how that peer review team found the things they thought were good, things they thought we needed to work on. So yeah, that's out there. The Care Quality Commission, I'll try and be diplomatic, but the message changes a little bit from time to time about when they think inspections will start. At the moment, they're looking at some pilot inspections that took place in a relatively small number of councils, and they're seeing the learning from those, and then their plan is to announce their approach to the next to inspections proper. Our current understanding is that they'll start with 20 councils, and that the earliest that a council might hear that it was going to be in that first wave would be in December, and that the council would get 9 or 10 weeks of notice before inspectors actually came. But in that time, they'd expect us to do work like produce a self-assessment, be clear about the case files that they might expect us, that the Care Quality Commission will audit, and pieces of work like that. So we have to expect that we'll be in that first tranche, because it will be silly for us to hope that we weren't going to be. So our preparatory work is ongoing. But the key thing for us, I think, is an inspection result from Care Quality Commission will reflect how well we support Doncaster people. So our job is to support Doncaster people better. So we focus on that rather than distorting what we do around an inspection.
Thank you for that. Sounds a very encouraging progression. Let's hope we do get chosen. Thank you.
Councillor Jones, do you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Out of the peer review, is there an action plan within the report?
The peer review's got a set of recommendations within it. What we've chosen not to do, Councillor Cox, is write another separate action plan for a peer review alongside what Doncaster people have already told us in our local account that is produced annually. So, because otherwise we'll give ourselves too many action plans, too many things to work to, and we'll get confused and not do the things that matter. Quite a lot of what the peer review team found overlap with what Doncaster people have already said about us. So they've said, for Doncaster people have already said, and this is what Council Cabinet approved at the end of last year, they said you need to be better at getting alongside us, and the jargon is co-producing what you're going to do. So the peer review team found that we've made a lot of strategic progress in doing that, but it wasn't filtering down enough, which is exactly in line with what people have already said. So what we're not trying to do is duplicate our reports, but we are making sure that what they have said, and you'll be able to look at it for yourself, is reflected in the actions that we take.
Is a clear definition between what the treatment said and what the peer review said?
There's no argument. There's no. So the peer review team have added some different angles, some helpful angles as well. So they've talked about, for example, they've said that adult social care needs to be clearer about communicating with its staff. That's a really helpful point. That's on me. So our staff in working adult social care in the council, but also the many staff who are working in other organisations providing direct care, how are we making sure that they understand what we're about? So we're just about to produce for those other staff working in other organisations something which the national jargon is called a market position statement, which sets out if I'm working in a care home, or if I'm in home care, if I'm thinking about a direct payment, what's the council thinking about this, how's it going to develop? And we're also just about, hopefully next month, to publish a workforce strategy that again sets out our kind of offer and the support that our staff need. So we've got, there were some other dimensions that were raised in the peer review. There's no disagreement though with what Doncaster people are saying, and we've got plans to cover off those actions in different places.
When you talk about our staff, does that include the third-party agencies?
Yeah, so that's why I made the point about other providers out there. So adult social care is delivered by many, many different people. Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much. We'll crack on. We'll try and stick to priority questions. Councillor Cox, you've got a question around rough sleepers.
It's a very short question and a slightly longer answer. So the biggest reason why rough sleeping's increased is that there's a cost of living crisis in Doncaster. Doncaster people and families are under a huge amount more pressure now than they've been under for a number of years. Clearly that was exacerbated by the pandemic, but we'll all have different interpretations about the cost of living crisis, but one of the things that we can point to quite clearly is the number of people that present to the housing options service that's run by St Ledger Housing has increased hugely and is still at very high levels compared to what it was before the pandemic. So one reason is just pressure on people and families, and greater reports of kind of family breakdowns and people that are not able to stay together, and that sort of displacement that hits our wider homelessness system and it's created a lot of pressure for St Ledger colleagues. Had some investment from the council to help deal with that, but the system's running a lot hotter now than it was a few years ago. Obviously, not all of that homelessness pressure, and thank heavens the vast majority of it does not translate into rough sleeping, but when you've got that greater churn rate, if you like, that's part of the problem. When we look at some specifics as well, so again, national stuff that we'll all be aware of, the pressure that our prisons are under. When we've looked at the route to street when we've picked up people in Doncaster, prison release is part of that story. So, again, I can't comment on the wider pressure for prisons and the wider issues that they're dealing with, but we've definitely bumped up our liaison with prisons and with the probation service, because it shouldn't be the case, should it, that anyone leaving prison has no alternative but to sleep on the street. So that's work that we've been doing. Another focused area that we've been working on has been people in temporary accommodation, where they've had been in temporary accommodation, they've got some vulnerability, that tenancy's come to an end, and they haven't got a plan for what to do next. So we've been working, our Complex Lives Service is starting to broaden its approach and start to work with some of those people. So what we've found over the last 3 years, sadly, is in terms of rough sleeping numbers, the pattern has been the same each year, but each year it's been slightly higher. So 2021, 2022 slightly higher, 2023 slightly higher still. What we've managed to do in August of this year in terms of that route to street work that I described is get the August number for 2023 to be lower than the August number for 2022, and our job now is to sustain that improvement so that when you see it in future OSMCs, you've got some assurance. But that's not going to make these headwinds that I've described go away. And the final point I want to make is, if this council had not had the vision about 4 or 5 years ago to invest in that Complex Lives Service and that Complex Lives Alliance, that even now you look out there and think there's more rough sleeping than you would want in Doncaster, but if you compare it to a few years ago, it's pretty unrecognisable in a positive direction. So we want to take credit for having and maintaining that investment to keep things where they are. It's just very difficult to maintain in terms of the pressure that people are under and our staff are under.
Yeah, Councillor Cox, and then Councillor Carr's also got a question on this same area.
Thank you. Yep, I couldn't disagree with anything you've said. And having once been homeless, I kind of get it. But how many people are actually rough sleeping at this point in time? Because I drive through town in the morning, early in the morning, and there are people in sleeping bags. And there were a guy just this morning, just near where Bistro used to be, in a sleeping bag. What's the engagement with them? We know that if they don't want to engage, they don't have to, and it becomes a life thing. But how many are there, and what we're doing to actively get help for these people?
So I won't give you a number now, but I'll take an action to make sure numbers are sent to this committee. There are 2 things that we count. So we'll do a snapshot survey of the number of people that we find rough sleeping at any one point in time. But in practice, there's quite a lot of churn there. There are some people that, sadly, are rough sleeping consistently over a period of time. There are a number of other people where there's a churn and a snapshot doesn't capture them. So what we also collect is the number of people cumulatively over a given period of time. So we'll make sure you're kind of cited on those numbers. They've, since that Complex Lives investment, they've been fairly stable and steady, times when they're up, times when they're down. Obviously, one person rough sleeping is one person too many. We've had some recent exacerbation, and what I've described as the approaches to deal with that. In terms of what we do, as you say, you've got the experience yourself. There's a twin approach really. So there's an approach which is broadly about enforcement. So people need to have that kind of angle where we're supporting them, local people, local businesses around an approach that describes aspects of behaviour associated with rough sleeping that we don't want to tolerate as a borough. So some joined up approach to that. But then the bigger thing, I think the more important thing, is the approach to compassion, so that people have access to support via that Complex Lives Alliance, via the Changing Lives kind of setting in Doncaster, kind of via our hostels. So it's a combination of those two things. You can't just do it via enforcement, but you can't just do it via compassion as well, because people kind of engage when they want to engage, but sometimes we have to provide an element of compulsion to that. And I think the key thing as well for our Complex Lives Alliance is working out who the people are at any one point in time that most will benefit from our support. So that very much prioritising rough sleepers, but I also, as I've said, in terms of people at risk of losing their tenancies, thinking about those people, thinking about people about to be released from prison. So it's quite a broad front they have to work on, and it's about how to target their resource in that context.
Thank you.
Chair, just a point. In that report, can you put known and not known within the contact of those particular people? Because there's a difference between knowing the person's doing it, consistently, and not knowing because they're coming on into the system.
So we'll see if we can provide some qualitative information about it, but I think the numbers themselves will tell you the number at any one time.
But some of those that you talked about are known, and they are consistently known. And I think there is compassion there about knowing whether they are consistently part of that process, repeat offenders.
Okay. So the way.
But there are people that are coming into the system, as you've explained, because of the circumstances, wherever they will be new. So I think it's important that we know how many are consistent.
Okay.
I'll just bring Councillor Khan in at this stage, because I know that your panel looks at some of these issues. So,
Chair, the question that I had has already been answered by Phil. So I don't have that, but yeah, thank you.
It's not been answered to me, I'm sorry.
So I'm just going to.
No, I'm about the question I was going to ask after Councillor Cox has now been answered by Phil in the answer that is given him. So I don't need to ask that question now.
So
thank you.
Just to clarify, if that's okay, Chair. So I think there's two sets of information it will provide. So the first is about the numbers. So in terms of Councillor Cox's question. And we'll describe the snapshot number, and we'll describe the cumulative number over a period of time. And the second thing is we'll seek to segment those numbers according to our current intelligence, because your point, Councillor Jones, is people that we know everybody, because we talk when they're there, we engage with them. But it's more that sense where I think you want to get into the cohort of people where you'd say there's more of a consistency about their rough sleeping, and a cohort where there's less consistency.
thank you for that. We'll move on to Councillor Kearsley's question.
Thank you. It was just regarding the adult health and wellbeing safeguarding assessments. How can the assessment waiting time be reduced, do you think?
So we're following the same formula and reducing the waiting times for adult safeguarding as we followed with our adult social work assessments and our occupational therapy assessments. And both of those have gone down markedly. And so we're going to follow a similar trajectory with safeguarding. So although the numbers are still higher than they should be, we're lower in Q1 than we were in Q4, and we'll expect to see that continue on the basis of the work that we've described. And I say formally because it's just a way of working that's yielded results. And it's nothing more complicated, really, I think, than kind of management focus and grip on recording with that group of people. So the assurance I can give you is in terms of response, urgent safeguarding issues for adults are dealt with promptly. It's just you'll get that lag with recording. And then the longer the lag, the system's unforgiving, which it should be really. It will just, when did it start? When did you record that it ended? That's how long it took. So the more of those outliers we haven't mopped up, the greater, while we mop them up, our average is going to be quite high. So we found that with occupational therapy, where the average response time now is 8 days from an occupational therapist perspective, whereas what we were recording last year, it would have been a matter of months. So our job with safeguarding is to do something similar, and we've got a similar management technique to do that. The other thing I'll say is that, again, it's back to my earlier point about how confusing things can be for Doncaster people. Because if I'm approaching adult social care, if I'm going down a safeguarding route, it's a different route than if I'm going down a route where I think I just want a discussion about my needs. My needs might be quite similar. So there's work we're doing around improving our approach to access. The first stage of that, we've made our access more local and less centralised, so we can have quicker local conversations with people about what they need. The second stage for us will be about making safeguarding part of that conversation, rather than you going to a safeguarding team necessarily and then being bounced to another team when the safeguarding bit's done. So I think there are chances to improve it further just by making things a bit more simple. But the short answer to your question is the same techniques we've used in those other areas we're using in safeguarding, and we'll get a similar impact.
That's great. Thank you.
Thank you. We have touched on fly tipping quite a lot, so I'll move on quickly again to another priority question, tackling climate change. Councillor Cobby, you've got a question?
Yeah, I do. Just looking at like page 25 in the report, I know it is a common question we've asked in previous quarterly reports, so I appreciate apologies in advance for the repeat of the question, but it is quite concerning looking at the information there about the number of homes we fitted with improving energy efficiency. Is it possible to get a bit of further update on this? I appreciate in the report it does say that we can't get all the details shared by government as well, but just looking that we are quite below under target.
Yeah, so just in terms of numbers, since 2021, we've had 1,100 homes with works done, which you could put under the umbrella of retrofit for thermo efficiency. The funding that we've put in is 12 million as a council. That's been alongside 13.6 million of government funding. It's fair to say that there's still quite a bit of work to do, particularly across the HRA stock, because the figures that we've talked about before to get the HRA stock to the right level to be reflective or commensurate with carbon neutrality by 2040 is hundreds of millions. It's not been easy either, because one of the problems that we've got is, again, it's funding, it's timescales, and then everybody else is also wanting to do it as well. So there's a big drain on the market. And what we've also found is that the process isn't perhaps as easy as it could be. So when some of these works are fitted, they also have to be certified afterwards for the funding to be released. And one of the problems we've had is just getting capacity of the people to do the certification. So it has been a bit of a challenge for us. What we've tried to do, particularly with the council house properties or the HRA properties, is make sure we do as many as we can and max out on the money. It's been a bit harder on the ones in private homes because it's not solely being paid for. There has been some element of match. And actually people have just decided, well, I'm not going to have the intrusion or the costs of doing some of this in my own home. So currently there are about 4 schemes that we're running across what I'd consider to be non-HRA properties. We can provide more info if needed through Richard Smith, but it's fair to say we'll grasp the funding as much as we can, but sometimes the timescales and more actually the capacity of the market to deliver do restrict our ability. And the reality is we do end up sometimes, rather than say, use the term handing the money back, we don't spend as much as we perhaps would have liked to, it's fair to say, but that is just a challenge with where we are currently. Whether or not there's going to be a more consolidated piece across South Yorkshire, given that I think that the Mayor has a view on this within the MCA, and whether or not government are going to look at consolidating that into kind of more consistent funding to assist us, that might be, that I think that would be useful, rather than we get a tranche of it, then a tranche of it, then a tranche of it. I think if we had a sustained picture, it might make things easier. But the biggest challenge at the minute is just having people to do the works and certify the works and get them signed off.
It'd be good to get a bit more information, as you suggested, because I think we ask the same questions every, and I think we need just a little bit more answer and a bit more detail too.
Yeah, I think within one of the work programmes there is an update in regard to some of this work, but because I think is that a regen next week? It's 17th. Yes, it is next week, isn't it? So you've got 2 updates. So there is an update there. So perhaps when we've got that information, we could just send it across to you.
If that's possible. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hempshaw, you've got a question?
Thank you. So we know that recycling reduces environmental impact. Would the authority be in a position to provide recycling bins in parks and busy streets across the city? This would help with contributing to a green mentality.
Yeah, so it's something that I've discussed with street scene colleagues, because on the face of it, yeah, in principle, looks a good idea. One of the concerns that's been identified through research in places that have used this, and some places have put them in and had to extract them, is that it does get contaminated, particularly in relation to parks. So people might put things like dog waste into the recycling element of it. Then what we've got is a difficulty, I think, in disaggregating the segregation. So hopefully, nationally, the scheme that they're looking at in relation to deposit returns, so you to return a bottle and you get a small deposit, might provide more of an incentivization. I think it's something that we need to keep a watching eye on. For now, I don't think it's intended to put them in on block. There is also an issue of service capacity as well, to be able to go out and get the waste out and segregate the waste, because it's not just as straightforward as emptying a bin. But I certainly think it's something we can consider as a longer term objective, and perhaps when we sorted some of the working patterns out in relation to street scene, that's something that I think we could look at.
Thank you. I can see the challenges, but I just think it's pretty sad when we are a city now. Most cities do have that, recycling the black bin waste, and we don't have that option, and that's why I mentioned the mentality of being greener. It just would hopefully spiral to people's everyday lives, but thank you for that.
Councillor Carr, did you have a question?
Thank you, Chair. Dan, do we know of any local authorities who are doing with the recycling in public places?
I can find out, because we've done. Yeah, London probably. Also, I think it depends on some of the demographics as well. I'm going to be honest on that. I think it depends on some of the demographics as to where you might locate. But I certainly find out from colleagues. When I asked at Street Scene, they said, well, we've done some research with those that have implemented it and those that have removed it and those that have kept it. So we can certainly find out.
It was just to see what challenges they faced and get a broader view on it, that's all.
Thank you. Councillor Cobby, did you want to quickly ask the question about tree inspection?
Yeah, just a quick one. We have asked this again previously in the last quarterly reports as well. I know the last one we mentioned that we'll get a bit more data, but I also note that earlier on we still got some vacancies in this department. I just wanted to know a bit more again about when we're going to get this information about the tree inspections, and also the struggles about recruiting to those vacancies as well, because I think you noted that last time as well.
So if I just talk about the tree data. So the tree data is not about reactive inspections. It's not about somebody emailing or picking up the phone to say there's a problem with a tree. It's about proactive going out and plotting the trees, because the intelligence then will help you with your maintenance or intervention schedule, because you know where they are and you know what condition they're in. It's quite a big job. It's been complicated by a shift from a system called TreeWise to a system called, I think it's called Alloy. One of the problems has been the IT glitches that we've had with that, and then how the new system integrates with other systems, for example, like our customer relationship management central CRM system. So the issue has been how we get the data to integrate. That's meant that we've not migrated some of the information over. That's not meant that we haven't been doing reactive tree inspections, because they still have. Since the 1st of April, there's been, in relation to kind of public requests or elected member requests or concerns, 1,360 inspections or visits to see trees. I'll check with the team as to where we are with the IT now. Yes, in terms of a timescale for when we're going to get some of the data, because this has been on as a performance indicator to report on without any data for quite some time. Recruitment, yeah, it is a challenge for us. I think I've been working with colleagues in HR, and I've been working with colleagues in and across street scene to look at how we can perhaps incentivise people coming along. One of the problems that we've got generally, I think, is that is local authority considered as attractive as career as it used to be in some respects for people coming through? And actually, to train, for, you know, I think that is just the truth. And also, some of these roles are quite, I would say, demanding in terms of qualifications. And actually, when you look at the grade, are people going to be attracted by the grade to do some of those qualifications, to do what is quite a technical and, in some respects, physically demanding job? So I think there's a wider piece of work to do. But the 3 horticulturalists is a problem for us, particularly within the tree work, because we've got, you know, a programme to plant lots of trees, and also we want to make sure that we protect and maintain our green space as much as we can. And we do. We do have issues, you know, in relation to making sure that some of the works that are done by external contractors are compliant with our aspirations in and around green space and trees. And again, that presents a challenge with the level of resource that we've got, and it keeps, you know, a certain individual very, very busy.
Thank you for that. We'll move on to the next section, and we've got a question from Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Chair. Just a question around inward investment, and I know we've got a particularly difficult landscape to navigate through when it comes to business at the moment. And I'd like to thank Business Doncaster and Chris Dungwood for the fantastic work that they've always done. And what support do we have in place at the moment to help them to achieve the targets that we are setting?
Important to recognise this is a relatively new indicator within the suite, and I think it's useful that you've identified the excellent work that's done by Chris and the team, because actually that's quite often not cited because it's not seen. It's, you know, it's not like grass, it's not like bins, it's not like litter. I think what we are doing is looking at the resources within the team. So, you know, the team's got the investment side and it's got the employment side, and on the investment side it's got specific people such as rail. One of the challenges we've got as well is a bit of an ageing workforce when you look at the profile, so there could be an awful lot of corporate memory that's gone. So what we need to do is align the current resources and review those with what's emerging in the new economic strategy, particularly around some of the sectors. Because traditionally, one of the issues that we've got is we'll attract investment for manufacturing and logistics, but are we attracting investment in private sector research and development? Are we getting advanced manufacturing beyond just traditional manufacturing, such as what you've got at the AMRC in Sheffield? What are we doing to build on some of the base sectors that we've got, particularly around rail? What are we doing to attract more green technology and advancement in that? I have had a conversation with Chris and with Scott in the early stages to look at how we can match the level of resources within the team to the expectations and demands that we've got within the economic strategy. So to come back to the support, we're looking at roles. There is a vacancy in there at the minute which we're looking at to recruit to. And I'm also having a dialogue with Chris and the team about succession planning, because we've got a few people in there, I think, who have an awful lot of corporate memory. But when they move on, we may have a challenge. So we've got to think about, you know, the future going forward.
Thank you, Chair. No, it was a comment which Councillor Hemshall mentioned earlier as well, going way back early in the meeting, around how if we can end up in negative spirals because of decisions that we take, and sometimes, you know, we have to bolster workforce and empower them more to help, you know, make the City Council better. And I think Business Doncaster are absolutely fantastic, and I've worked with them over a number of years. So yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm actually going to move the next section to the next meeting, with my question about infrastructure. I think we'll probably actually put we don't touch on it very much about transport and digital connections fit for the future, but I think I'll put it at the top of the agenda next time. So we'll go into it in more detail next time. So thank you. So that actually means that we've finished that particular section, and I just need to make sure. We need to agree the recommendations, which are on which page and which paragraph, please, Christine? That must be relevant. Oh, sorry, page 22. The committee, thanks a lot, thank you. Committee asked to note and comment on the Q1 performance and financial information. Do you agree and note the discussion, everybody? Agreed. Okay, thank you very much. We'll move on to the questions for St Ledger Homes. And Councillor Hempshaw, if you'd like to kick off.
Thank you. Can you tell us how many families with children are in temporary accommodation? I'm aware that this figure has sort of been rising nationally for the last 13 years.
Yeah, thank you. Obviously, this report is relating to Q1, which ends April, May, June, end of June. So I can tell you about the data then, and I can try and bring you up to date. But in doing so, I'm probably going to go on to the question that I know Councillor Cobby is going to answer. So just bear that in mind. So first of all, just to give you a little bit of context, you're right, absolutely right. It is rising nationally, and it's rising quite quickly. So if we look at the total number of households in temporary accommodation and hotels, nationally that's risen by 22% in the last year. In Yorkshire and Humber by 22%, in England by 10%, in Doncaster it rose by 5%. If you break it down to households in hotels, it's again rising. These are all Q1 figures. So England rose by 25%, Yorkshire and Humber by 16%, Doncaster reduced by 74%. So more people in temporary accommodation. That subset in terms of hotels, less people in hotels in Doncaster, not nationally. Now, starting to talk about children. As at the end of March 23, some of the time frames are a bit odd. England had risen by 131%, Yorkshire and Humber by 50%, Doncaster had reduced by 100%. Now, I can bring you up to date. It kind of might lead me into the question that I know Councillor Cobby you was wanting to ask. So that as of Friday, we had 155 households in temporary accommodation. Now, bearing in mind a household could be a single person. It's just the term we use or it could be a family. Of that 155, sorry, and I should say that temporary accommodation, when I refer to temporary accommodation, I'm predominantly referring to St Ledger managed properties. Okay, so of which 112 were households with children, and that was 235 children in temporary accommodation, a phenomenal number. Now, there were 41 households in hotels, of which 36 were in Doncaster and 5 were placed outside the city of Doncaster. And of those, 12 were households that had children. Now, I've just checked the figures just before I walked in. So currently, there are 2 families with children placed out of borough in hotels, and that involves 3 children, and they're placed in Sheffield. However, the information I've got is highly likely that those 2 families are placed in Sheffield for very specific reasons to do with them, which may be about the reasons they came into temporary accommodation in the first place, i.e. fleeing domestic violence and their personal safety, etc. So the numbers, the general picture is this. The numbers approaching us are through the roof. The numbers coming into temporary accommodation are the highest ever. We've never had 155 units of temporary accommodation that we've had to use. So that's 155 properties that we're taking out of the normal lettings process to place people because they're in dire need. But in terms of the number of families and household rather, general households placed in hotels, it's high, but it's significantly lower than last year. So I hope that makes sense.
Can I come back there? So when they're in the hotels, how long generally do they stay in that state of being in a hotel with no cooking facilities?
Well, each hotel's different, bearing in mind, but it churns very quickly. So there's a national standard that no family should be in a hotel for more than 6 weeks, and we've not breached that. We don't breach that. So they churn very quickly, and we make it a real attempt to get them out of hotels. And that's why we've got 155 in properties managed by St Ledger on a temporary basis.
Thank you. So just to double check, you did say that there are 235 children in temporary accommodation within the St Ledger system?
Yes.
Yeah. And as we know, private rentals can often be temporary accommodations as well. Working in a school, I know the impacts it does have on children, sort of being in that limbo, basically.
Can I just be clear that we do not use private rental property as temporary accommodation? That's that. We can't do that. We've got to, if we place in private rented, we have to ensure people get at least a year's tenancy. So we don't use private rented for temporary. It's only our own stock that we're using for temporary, or if we have to, we're going to hotels.
Yeah, sorry, I was just meaning, aside from you and St Ledger, we've also got the problems that private rental these days in a cost of living crisis
Massive
have
problems.
the impacts on children, So thank you for that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Cobby, you've got some questions.
Yeah, just follow up, because I know you have mostly answered my KPI 4 question. Just to follow up on what you're saying, what's the relationships like with the hotels? Because I know there's sometimes pressure put on probably yourselves, whether hotels want to use it for their own guests, those rooms. What's it like, relationship with those and impacts on those who are using?
Virtually an impossible question to answer, because obviously we use a wide range of hotels, and it differs by the hotel, it differs by the location, it differs by the reason that we're trying to place people. For some individuals, some hotels will not take them. You know, we've had people that we've had to place a long distance away because their reputation, to be frank, precludes them from being accommodated. But generally, the relationship is very supportive and very helpful. There have been some other issues around other uses for hotels, which perhaps best not to go into at this place, but on the whole, it's very good.
Okay, thank you. No, it was just a question because I'm aware of some cases, not to say out loud, where it's been problematic.
Oh, there's without a doubt there is you know we have had serious issues where we've placed people in hotels and it's resulted in damage to the hotel and all the rest. And you can understand hoteliers being rather concerned about taking a small fraction of our clientele, but in some instances, yeah.
Or some pre-prejudice as well, which is some cases I'm aware of, but not to note in this forum today. I'll move on to KPI 5. Can you share a bit more information about this new KPI and why is it extremely high?
Yeah. Well, on KPI 5, so this is the number of preventions that we're able to make, and the performance is actually quite low. So it's about 30%, isn't it? So that we're managing to prevent. The target we set was 60%, and to be honest, we made a mistake on the target. It was a new target, and we took advice from DLUC about what we should be expecting, and they suggested 60% would be a reasonable target. In actual fact, what they're now saying is they got that wrong. So if you look at numbers in Yorkshire and Humber and nationally, and I've not got them in front of me, they are generally around the 30% mark. But it's a symptom, to be honest, of the fact that we're getting a vast number of people approaching us. They often approach very late in the day, and as a result, our ability to prevent them becoming homeless is limited. So next year, I think we'll, you know, if it's agreed by Doncaster Council, we'll reduce the target. Clearly, we want to prevent as many as we possibly can, but there is an issue there about timing, as I said, particularly, and options. What options have we got? One of the things, and I don't know if you want me to go into it, and Leanne sort of hinted at it, I guess, is around affordability of the private rented sector. And I know some of you have heard me before talking about the fact that for people on benefits, the private rented sector on the whole is not affordable at the moment. So that really is not an option that we've got there readily available. We are placing the private rented sector, we're placing more than we ever have, but in actual fact, when you look at rents, it's something like 3% of private sector rentals are within the benefit levels that the DWP are prepared to pay. So it's extremely difficult. That said, we're working with some great landlords and they're very supportive and willing to work with us, and we're placing more than ever before, but it is really problematical. And the ending of a private sector tenancy is one of the main reasons why people are approaching us.
Okay, thank you. And I'll move on to KPIA 11. It's quite worrying that stress, depression, anxiety is the highest reason for staff absence. What are St Ledger doing to reduce the cause of stress in the workplace?
Okay, interesting question and interesting assumption. And you're quite right, absolutely worrying. Nationally, stress and depression are becoming the main reasons for absence. Now, you referred to stress in the workplace. What I need to tell you is the vast majority of the stress that we experience with our staff is not workplace related stress. It's personal stress and depression arising from personal circumstances. And you can only imagine what range of factors impact on that. But it's only 3.8% of our sickness is attributable to work-related stress. Now, just in terms of what we do about it, obviously we take that incredibly serious. Any reason for absence we take incredibly serious, and the amount of absence that we've got is higher than we would have had pre-COVID. It hasn't come down much since then, and it's far too high from what we want to see. But we have a really robust approach about it, or a really comprehensive approach. So all work-related stress cases are subject to a stress risk assessment, where we try and identify what those factors might be and what we can do about them. We have a supported healthcare scheme for our staff. So all of our staff can access confidential counselling and support, and they get 8 free sessions of counselling and support through our Medicash care scheme. We've trained all of our land managers in handling mental health related issues. All of our frontline teams have been trained over the last 12 months in terms of identifying signs of mental ill health in customers and staff, and how to handle it and how to offer support. We have mental health support workers, staff that are designated like fire wardens or whatever. We designate people as mental health support staff. We've done resiliency learning training for our staff to help them look at some of the issues that may cause them personal stress. And in terms of our property services, they are working with Andy's Man Club locally to look at dedicated sessions around stress and mental health issues, particularly in relation to people coming from a trades background. So it's really high, it's really worrying. If I'm honest, I don't really know what more that we can do. We are doing an awful lot.
Thank you. It does sound quite a lot. Just picking up on the earlier figure that you said about 3.8 saying from work. Obviously, I'll take that into consideration as well, but I always think as well, sometimes work is a big part of work, like any person's life in the working age. So whether it's something small or something big, it can still contribute to that mental health, whether it's if it's personal work will add to our. Just want to know, I know a lot of things going on. Is there conversations about workload with staff, and is that working with the trade unions as well?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have what we call a check-in process, where all of our staff sit down formally with their manager, usually on a monthly basis. Some of the trade staff, it's up to 2 monthly, I think. And we also have an annual PDR process, a review process annually. And we've introduced that check-in process in the last 2 years, because before that it wasn't routinely happening. And I dip check that that takes place. So I require managers to send me copies of the forms that they've worked through with staff. And I don't go through the personal issues or whatever. I just want to see they're sitting down and they're having a reasonable conversation with their staff and trying to talk about it. So.
Thanks. So just one quick question. Is there an opportunity for those who might have a relationship breakdown for managers, so they might not be able to go to the manager? Are they able to speak to somebody else as well?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we've raised that a number of times. And we always stress that point. So yeah, absolutely. And as I say, we also have staff that are designated, I've forgotten the terminology, but mental health support staff effectively. So yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Leanne, do you just want to quickly ask you the last question?
Yeah, thank you. Just wondering how many St Ledger community halls have got access to the internet?
Well, I know you've had a really long day, so I'm going to give you a really short answer. None. We are reviewing all community halls, and that is something that we'll consider, but I have to say that at the moment we have no immediate plans to put Wi-Fi or internet into those communal halls.
How many community halls are there?
Now you're asking. It's in the region of about 25, 28, something like that. We're reviewing them, and we have, in the last year or two, well, over the last few years, we've reduced some of the numbers, and actually we've converted some into accommodation, but it's around about 25, 28.
So is that predominantly a financial reason to not put the internet in?
Yeah, predominantly financial and maintenance, yeah, absolutely, yeah. I mean, if we could, it'd be a great idea to have it, but, you know, it obviously is a financial issue.
Yeah, I mean, I get that, but it just does significantly affect the activities that can take place within the community halls. It just seems a bit limiting for most people that live, maybe stereotyping here, but around that area might not have it in the home, but would use the communal hall for that purpose. It just seems a bit like something we should look at in the future.
I don't disagree, but the finances are getting ever more tight. And I mean, we outturned this last year on a surplus of about £30,000 or something like that out of 55 million. That's how tight things are this year. So there's not a lot of spare slack. You know, we've had the rents capped, as you well know. We've hit inflation rising at 10%. Wage inflation's been considerable. So finances are getting really tight, and the chances of us investing on things like that and taking it out of, say, the repairs budget is very limited. So we just got to make some tough decisions, and absolutely it's something you'd want to do. We support somewhere in the region of 260 groups that are using our community centres, so they're really well used. But you're right, you know, if they had internet, the range of things they could do would be far better. I agree.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you, everybody. So asked to agree the recommendations. The committee was asked to note the progress of St Ledger Homes' performance outcomes and the contribution St Ledger Homes as makes to supporting City of Doncaster's strategic priorities. Is this agreed? Agreed. Thank you. So we just need very quickly to note the scrutiny work plan and the forward plan. Has anybody got anything in particular? Councillor Khan.
Just before that, Chair, I've been led to believe that Dave's looking for employment or retirement. Is that correct, Dave? And I'd like to thank Dave for the work that he's done here at St Ledger since he's been with us since 2020, and all the best with whatever he chooses to do next.
Thank you for that. No, I'm not looking for any more employment. I've had enough employment in the last 40 years. So no, I am looking to retire early next summer. It won't be till May. I've given 8 months' notice so we can get a replacement in. But no, I appreciate that. It's really kind of you. Thank you.
Thank you for raising that, Councillor Khan. Same as well, just we're not green with envy or anything like that. Is everybody okay with the recommendations? Thank you. I'd just like to say very briefly that we've just come, the Wellbeing and Fairness Commission has just concluded its work, which will be coming out with, I was put on there as a observer from Overview and Scrutiny, and they will coming out with some recommendations, and actually what we're talking about, there are quite a few around equalities. So I think we've got a really good role here to sort of keep an eye on it over the next 5 years, whatever, to make sure that it doesn't, there was lots of talk of it not being a document that's stuck on a shelf, so I think You know, there might be very specific recommendations in there that some of the panels might want to take up, but I think we should have an overview of seeing how it is actually implemented going forward. Okay, thank you very much, everybody. I think we've finished now. Thank you.